For years, I had this business idea that I thought could really take off. I would tell anyone who would listen about it friends, family, even random people at parties. I worked a decent job in finance but always dreamed of starting my own company. My friend from college thought I should meet someone who had experience in the industry. That's how I ended up at a bar downtown one Friday night, being introduced to the person who would later make my life a living nightmare. Let's just call this person the CEO, since they made it very clear that's what they wanted to be. The CEO and I hit it off initially. We talked for hours about my business idea, and they seemed genuinely interested. They had the industry knowledge I lacked, and I had the vision. Perfect match, right? We met for lunch the following week to hash out the details. The CEO expressed their love for my concept and thought we could really make it work. They wanted to take the CEO position since they'd be putting in most of the hours and could contribute about 85% of the startup costs. I responded that this arrangement seemed fair since I couldn't quit my day job at the time, but I could work part-time on operations and put in 15% of the cash. The CEO then offered me 5% ownership for that level of involvement and investment. I hesitated but eventually agreed. It wasn't ideal, but I wanted to see my idea come to life, and 5% of something was better than 100% of nothing. We shook hands, and I transferred my portion of the investment to the company account. It wasn't a life-changing amount, but it was all I could afford to risk at the time. The CEO said they'd have contracts drawn up soon. For the first few months, things were busy but productive. I worked during evenings and weekends, handling what I could while the CEO supposedly worked 80 plus hours a week. I even brought in someone I'd worked with before, I'll call them the consultant, who had valuable expertise. But then things started getting weird. The CEO completely lost it one day over the stationery I'd ordered. Stationery they had selected. They ranted that it was completely unacceptable, complaining about the paper quality being wrong and the letterhead being too big. They demanded to know if I had even looked at the items before ordering them. I reminded them that these were exactly what they had picked out and mentioned I had the email where they approved the design. The CEO brushed this off, saying they had changed their mind and that the stationery looked unprofessional. They ordered me to fix it. When the contracts finally arrived months later, they didn't match what we'd agreed to. My 5% ownership had mysteriously shrunk, and the terms of my investment were different. I pointed out that the document didn't reflect our agreement, and that I was supposed to have 5% ownership. The CEO dismissed my concerns, saying we would fix it later when we could afford the legal fees to redraft, and urged me to just sign it for now. I refused to sign. From there, the relationship deteriorated rapidly. Every time we were in the same room, the CEO would find something to criticize or argue about. I tried to focus on my operational duties and minimize our interactions, occasionally with the consultant stepping in when things got heated. 2 years passed with minimal communication. I heard the business was doing well, but the CEO never shared any reports or updates with me. Then right around Christmas, I got a phone call. The CEO wished me happy holidays before explaining that they thought it best to end my involvement with the company. They offered to refund my initial investment and suggested we call it even. I told them I was happy to step back from the day-to-day operations, but I wasn't giving up my ownership stake and didn't want a refund. The CEO expressed confusion at my response, saying it didn't make sense and urging me to just take the money. I declined, reminding them that I had invested in the company and intended to remain invested. The call ended abruptly. Later that day, I received an email claiming I had resigned, which was completely false. I immediately replied correcting their version of events. A few days later, I received a demanding message to come pick up a check for my refund. I ignored it. Then came a threatening letter from their attorney. I replied with a simple email explaining that their client's company appeared to be doing well based on what I'd heard about recent investments. I stated that I had no intention of accepting a simple return of my initial investment after all this time. The response I received left me stunned. The attorney claimed the CEO had never accepted my money into the company account but into some other company I'd never heard of. despite my transfer receipt clearly showing the name of our business. Suspicious, I did some investigating online. It turned out the CEO had been creating a new company every couple of months. Through some documents they had carelessly left in shared folders I still had access to, I discovered they had recently raised millions from investors at a valuation 200 times higher than when I invested. Not only that, but the CEO had been showing documents listing me as a owner to earlier investors. Documents I'd never seen, but apparently hadn't disclosed my stake to the newer investors. When I pointed out that this sounded like fraud, the attorney told me I was the one breaking the law by accessing those documents. They warned that if I didn't pick up my refund check, I would lose all rights to any money, and threatened that I'd be the one in trouble if I went to law enforcement. That was it. I contacted the appropriate financial authorities and provided them with all the documentation I had. The investigation moved at a glacial pace, taking nearly 5 years, but eventually the CEO was charged with over 30 felonies related to running what turned out to be a massive Ponzi scheme. They are now serving a lengthy prison sentence. Their attorney ended up getting disbarred for their role in the fraud. The CEO never even followed my original business plan. They just used it as a story to convince people to invest, then pocketed the money. The irony is that my business model actually works. I'm now running a successful company based on that original idea with partners who have integrity, and we're turning a solid profit. Sometimes I think about the CEO sitting in their prison cell and wonder if they realize how much easier it would have been to just run an honest business. I've lived in the same neighborhood for almost 15 years now. It's a quiet area with decent neighbors and a nice community pool that everyone pays for through our homeowners association dues. I'm a single parent with 2 teenagers, and that pool has been our summer sanctuary for years. For context, I work from home, so my schedule is flexible, which means I can often take breaks during the day when the pool is less crowded. My teenagers are old enough to go by themselves, but I still enjoy going with them when I can. Last summer, a new family moved into the house across from ours. They seemed nice enough at first, a couple with 3 young children who were always impeccably dressed. The woman of the house always had perfect hair and would constantly talk about their previous neighborhood, which apparently had much better amenities. Things were fine until pool season started. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June. I had finished my work early and decided to take my kids to the pool. There were only a few other people there, an elderly couple in the shallow end and a mom with a toddler. My teens immediately jumped in while I set up our things on some chairs in the corner. I had just settled in when this woman from across the street arrived with her 3 children. They had a ridiculous amount of pool toys, a cooler, and what looked like half their house packed into bags. She surveyed the area, pointed to where I was sitting, and walked over. She demanded that I move, claiming that those chairs were their spot. When I asked her to clarify, she explained that those specific chairs were where they always sit. She insisted her children needed to be in the shade, and that was supposedly the best spot. I looked around. There were at least 8 other empty chairs in similarly shaded areas. I apologized but explained that I had just gotten there and pointed out that there were plenty of other spots with shade. She argued that I didn't understand the situation. She claimed her children had sensitive skin and emphasized that they needed that specific spot. According to her, it was the only spot with the right amount of shade throughout the afternoon. I tried to reason with her, mentioning that my things were already set up and I was comfortable. I suggested she use one of the other available spots. That's when she pulled the status card. She asked if I knew who she was and proclaimed that her husband was on the Homeowners Association board. This was news to me since I regularly attended those meetings and had never seen her husband there. I politely told her that the pool chairs weren't assigned and reminded her of the first come, first served policy. She huffed and puffed, then stormed away to set up on the opposite side of the pool, all while loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about how some people had no respect for families with young children. I tried to ignore her and enjoy my afternoon, but she spent the entire time glaring at me and making passive-aggressive comments to the other parents who arrived. My teenagers were embarrassed but tried to make the best of it. The next day, I received an email from the Homeowners Association about new pool seating guidelines that would be discussed at the next meeting. Interesting timing. When I checked our neighborhood social media group that evening, I found a long post from this woman about how certain residents were monopolizing prime pool areas and how there should be a fair system where families with young children get priority seating. She didn't name me but included the detail about Tuesday afternoon so everyone knew exactly who she meant. Most neighbors ignored it, but a few of her new friends commented in agreement. What she didn't know was that I've been in this neighborhood far longer than she has, and most people here know me well. At the next homeowners association meeting, she and her husband showed up with a formal proposal, designated seating areas at the pool based on family needs, with priority given to those with children under 10. How convenient for her. When it was time for discussion, I raised my hand and made a point. I mentioned that we all pay the same homeowners association fees for pool access, regardless of family status. I questioned the fairness of creating a system where certain residents would have priority over others, suggesting it seemed discriminatory. Her husband quickly jumped to their defense. He insisted that this wasn't about discrimination but rather about being considerate to those with special needs. I responded by asking if those special needs included wanting a specific spot just because they arrived later than someone else and didn't want to use the other available chairs. Several neighbors chuckled at my comment. The woman's face turned red again. She angrily denied my version of events, accusing me of deliberately taking the best spot just to spite them. That's when our association president, an older gentleman who's known me for years, intervened. He shared his opinion that the current system of first come, first served had worked well for the 15 years the pool had been open. He stated that unless there was a genuine safety concern, he saw no reason to change the policy. Several other long-standing residents agreed with the president. The woman and her husband looked furious as their proposal was voted down. The following weekend, I arrived at the pool with my teenagers to find the woman and her family sitting in my spot, with their belongings spread across all the surrounding chairs as well. She smirked at me as I looked for somewhere else to sit. Fortunately, a neighbor I'm friendly with waved me over to share their area. Throughout the afternoon, I noticed the woman watching me, clearly waiting for a reaction. After that day, it became a ridiculous game. She would show up hours early just to claim the spot, even on days when the weather wasn't great for swimming. Sometimes her children didn't even get in the pool. They just sat there to hold the territory. This went on for weeks until I decided I'd had enough. I had wanted to escalate things, but her behavior was ruining everyone's summer. I compiled screenshots of her social media posts about me, emails she'd sent to neighbors rallying support against inconsiderate pool hoggers, and statements from other residents who had witnessed her behavior. I also had security camera footage from the pool showing how she'd reserved multiple chairs unnecessarily and turned away other residents. At the next homeowners association meeting, I presented my evidence and formally requested that the board address this harassment. The board was shocked. They immediately established a new rule: no saving seats for people who aren't present and no using multiple chairs for belongings when the pool is busy. The woman was furious. She stood up and began shouting, accusing me of targeting her family and discriminating against mothers. But the evidence was clear. Our association president responded and clarified that this wasn't about targeting anyone, but about ensuring fair access to amenities that everyone pays for. He pointed out that her behavior had been disruptive and unwelcoming to other residents. The woman grabbed her purse and stormed out, her husband trailing behind her. The following week, a for sale sign appeared in their front yard. Apparently, our neighborhood was no longer good enough for them. Thank God. I've been working night shifts for over a year now at the packaging warehouse on the outskirts of town. The money is decent, but the hours can really wear you down. 12-hour shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 days a week. By Friday morning, I'm usually running on fumes. The drive home is along this rural highway that winds through dense forest. No street lights whatsoever, just your headlights cutting through the darkness. Lots of sharp curves, tall trees on both sides, and deer that love to jump out in front of your car without warning. The speed limit is 55 miles per hour, but most people push it to 65 or more. I used to be one of those people until I started noticing police cars hiding in the little turnoffs along the route. After seeing 3 different co-workers get expensive tickets, I decided it wasn't worth it. Better to arrive home 5 minutes later than to blow a day's wages on a speeding ticket. This one morning, I was absolutely exhausted. It had been an especially busy night at the warehouse. A big shipment came in late, and we had to stay on our feet the entire shift to get everything processed. The sky was completely overcast, blocking out even the faintest starlight. It was the kind of darkness that seems to swallow your headlights after 30 feet. I was being extra careful because of how tired I felt. The last thing I needed was to hit a deer or miss a curve while fighting to keep my eyes open. I was going about 58 miles per hour on the straightaways and slowing down appropriately for the curves. Suddenly, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. They were gaining on me fast, which meant this person was really flying. Within seconds, this car was right on my bumper, so close I couldn't even see their headlights anymore, just the glow illuminating my back window. They started flashing their high beams at me, clearly wanting me to speed up or get out of their way. But here's the thing, there was nowhere for me to go. This highway has no shoulder, just ditches on both sides. And it's not like I was blocking traffic at 5 a.m. The road had been completely empty in both directions. What really confused me was why they wouldn't just pass me. We were on a straightaway where you could see far ahead. There were no oncoming cars. They could have easily gone around. As the high beams kept flashing, I got irritated. I was already tired, and now I had this aggressive driver making my trip home more stressful. I muttered to myself that if they wanted to play it that way, they'd get what they deserved. I set my cruise control to exactly 55 miles per hour, the precise speed limit. Before I had been going closer to 58 or 60 on the straight sections, but not anymore. For the next few minutes they stayed glued to my bumper, revving their engine occasionally like they were trying to intimidate me. I just kept my eyes on the road ahead and maintained that steady 55. Then we approached one of the curvy sections marked with no passing zone signs. Apparently, this was the last straw for my tailgater. Despite the double yellow lines and the approaching blind curve, they gunned their engine and swerved into the oncoming lane to pass me. Their car, some kind of dark sedan, roared past me, and the driver gave me what I'm pretty sure was an obscene gesture as they cut back in front of me. I just shook my head and kept driving. About 30 seconds later, I rounded a curve and saw something that made me smile despite my exhaustion. Blue and red lights were flashing up ahead. A police car had pulled out from one of those hidden spots and was now pulling over the impatient driver who had just blown past me. When I drove by the scene, I could see the police officer already out of his car walking toward the sedan with a flashlight in hand. The officer noticed me passing by and gave me a quick nod, which I returned with a small wave. I imagined the officer asking for the tailgater's license and registration and questioning why they had been pulled over. I pictured the tailgater trying to defend themselves by complaining about the slow driver ahead of them. The officer would probably respond by pointing out they were going 78 in a 55 zone and dangerously passing on a blind curve. I didn't stick around to witness the rest of their interaction, but I'm sure it ended with a hefty ticket. Maybe 2 tickets. The rest of my drive home was peaceful and undisturbed. I think about how that impatient driver probably would have made it home only a minute or 2 before me if they'd just been patient. But instead, they were probably still on the side of the road, explaining themselves to a police officer and facing a ticket that would cost hundreds of dollars.